He had guarded doors in war zones before, but this was the first door that would not let him reach the man he loved. Every night, when the halls of St. Mercy Hospital settled into that strange hour between yesterday and dawn, the white German shepherd returned to the same place outside ICU Room 417. He did not bark. He did not scratch. He simply sat beneath the pale blue glow of the nurse's station, his thick white coat dimmed by shadows, his amber eyes fixed on the narrow strip of glass where the machines blinked inside. The staff had learned his rhythm by now. At 8 p.m., just after visiting hours ended, he would rise from the waiting room rug, walk past the vending machines, ignore the smell of coffee and disinfectant, and take his post beside the heavy double doors. At 2 a.m., when the hospital became quiet enough for sorrow to have a sound, he would lower his head to his paws and listen. At sunrise, when the first gray light touched the polished floor, he would stand again, stiff but steady, as if reporting for duty. His name was Ghost, though no one at St. Mercy had given it to him. The name was etched on a worn leather collar, the letters faded from weather and years of hands gripping it in trust. Beside the name hung a scratched Marine Corps dog tag, not meant for a dog at all, but carried by one like a promise. On it was printed the name of Staff Sergeant Caleb Brooks, United States Marine Corps, age 37, blood type O positive, Baptist, and beneath that, in letters so small most people missed them, never leave your six. Caleb was the man inside room 417. A black Marine from Savannah, Georgia, broad-shouldered even in stillness, with close-cropped hair, a trimmed beard, and hands that looked built for lifting weight no man should have to carry alone. But now those hands lay open on white sheets, one wrapped in tape for the fore, the other resting palm up near the railing, as if waiting for something familiar to come back. He had arrived 3 nights earlier after collapsing during a veterans outreach event at a community center 12 miles away. There had been no sirens in the story anyone told Ghost. No explanation a dog could understand. One moment Caleb had been standing, laughing softly with a group of boys who wanted to know if Marines were ever scared. The next, he was gone behind ambulance doors, and Ghost had run until a state trooper found him outside the emergency entrance, muddy, breathless, and refusing to move. Since then, the hospital had become his battlefield. The nurses called him gentle. Security called him a problem. Families passing by called him beautiful, sometimes reaching down to touch his head, only to stop when they saw his eyes. There was something in them that made strangers lower their voices. Something watchful. Something almost prayerful. Dr. Hannah Whitaker noticed him on the 4th night. She was 39, a critical care physician with tired blue eyes, a calm voice, and the kind of composure people mistook for distance. She had spent 15 years learning how to walk into rooms where families were breaking and keep her hands steady. But the white K9 unsettled her. Not because he was loud, because he was patient. That kind of patience did not come from training alone. It came from loss, or the fear of it. She paused near the ICU doors with a clipboard tucked against her chest and watched him lift his head before she had made a sound. "You again," she whispered. Ghost's ears rose. His gaze shifted from her face to room 417, then back again. Not begging, not warning, waiting. Hannah looked through the glass at Caleb Brooks. The monitors showed the same fragile numbers they had shown all evening. Heart rate steady but low. Oxygen stable. No major change. His scans had not explained enough. His labs had raised questions and answered none. He was alive, but not returning, as if some part of him had stopped at a distance and could not find its way back. "He can't come in," a night nurse said softly from behind the desk. "Policy." Hannah nodded. She knew the rules. She had repeated them herself. But Ghost was not looking at the bed anymore. He had turned his nose toward the lower edge of the ICU door, breathing in short, careful pulls. Then he stood, slowly. Every muscle in his body became still, then tense, like a bell about to ring. Hannah felt the air change before anything happened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a cartwheel squeaked. A sleeping child coughed in the waiting room. Ghost took one step forward and pressed his nose to the seam of the door. A low sound rose in his chest, not a growl, not quite a whine, but something ancient and certain. Hannah moved closer. "What is it, boy?" Ghost did not look at her. His eyes stayed locked on the room where Caleb lay motionless under the thin hospital blanket. Then, with a suddenness that made the nurse gasp, Ghost lifted one paw and placed it against the door, directly beneath the small window, as if he had found the exact place where the world had gone wrong. Hannah followed the line of his stare through the glass. At first she saw only the machines, the four-pole, the rise and fall of Caleb's chest. Then she noticed the dog tag on Caleb's bedside table trembling faintly, tapping once against the plastic tray. Tap. Silence. Tap. A rhythm too soft for anyone busy to hear. Ghost heard it. Ghost had been hearing it every night. And whatever he was guarding inside room 417, Hannah suddenly understood it was not just a Marine. It was a message. The night stretched on, long and unbroken, as Ghost shifted slightly on the cool tile, his paws silent against the polished floor. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the faint scent of wet asphalt and pine that drifted through the automatic doors whenever the airlock opened. The hum of the machines inside room 417 was steady now, a rhythmic comfort in the darkness, but Ghost remained vigilant, every muscle taut, ears pricked, tail low and unmoving. Somewhere deep in his mind, he remembered the sounds of helicopters, the metallic smell of oil and gunfire, and the feel of Guarding.A sliding from one perilous situation to another, always relying on him, always expecting him to notice, to act, to protect. And here, in the quiet of a city hospital far from any battlefield, the instincts persisted. Ghost lifted his nose, inhaling the sterile air mingled with the faint, unmistakable scent of his Marine. There was a new odor tonight, subtle but compelling, the smell of something amiss, a slight tension in the air that made his hackles rise just enough to make him aware without alarm. He padded a few steps forward, circling the doors, sniffing the floor with deliberate care, and then settled back down, pressing close to the base of the wall as if drawing strength from its solidity. Inside, Jordan stirred, blinking his eyes open to the soft green glow of the monitor, the beeping as gentle as a heartbeat. He felt the presence of something familiar, something alive that had not left him, a warmth at the periphery of his awareness, and he instinctively reached out, feeling for a connection that might not be there. Ghost heard it then, the whisper of movement, a subtle shift in the mattress as Jordan adjusted his position, and the dog tilted his head, amber eyes locking onto the faint outline of the man he had waited for all night. Dr. Emily Clark entered the corridor again, notebook in hand, her dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her footsteps soft against the linoleum. But even she hesitated when she saw Ghost. He did not move aside, did not acknowledge her with the eagerness of a pet seeking attention. He was sentinel and witness, and she understood that instinctively. The monitors showed normal readings, but the air carried a weight that numbers could not convey. She crouched slightly to meet Ghost's gaze, noticing the steady lift of his paw against the wall, the slight flick of his ears as he tuned into every sound from inside the room. And she felt a shiver of awareness that this dog was not merely guarding a man. He was guarding hope itself. Ghost shifted, the quiet scrape of his nails against the floor almost swallowed by the hum of the building, and padded closer to the door, lowering his body just enough to press against the edge, nose nearly touching the glass. A flicker of movement from Jordan caught his attention, and the dog's amber eyes softened, a recognition, a shared history that needed no words. The room was dim, shadows stretching long across the floor, and Ghost's presence created a calm that was almost tangible, a buffer against the sterile chill. He lay down partially, head resting on his paws, still alert, still listening, still waiting. And the corridor seemed to pause with him. Hannah Whitaker stepped back to let him be, feeling the reverence in the air, and in that space, the essence of trust became visible. Ghost had carried this vigil for days, nights folding into one another without complaint, and each evening he returned, paws wet from the rain or dry from the hallway tiles, eyes bright, coat gleaming faintly in the artificial light, a silent promise to remain until he was needed. Jordan's breathing evened, subconscious relaxation as his K9 companion maintained the perimeter of the world he could not yet navigate, and Ghost sensed the shift, noting the slight easing in tension in the room. The sound of distant elevators, the muted conversation of night staff, the faint clatter of carts in service areas were all cataloged by Ghost, each noise measured, each movement observed, and yet he remained steady, a quiet sentinel in a world of fleeting motions. Time became a blur of waiting, of observing, of sensing the intangible line between danger and safety, until the first hint of dawn crept through the frosted windows of the corridor, painting the linoleum with a pale gold that warmed the cool shadows. Ghost lifted his head, ears forward, eyes scanning the length of the hallway, then returned his gaze to the door, unwavering. Jordan stirred again, stretching a hand slightly as if to reassure himself of the presence he could not yet see, and Ghost responded with a subtle whine, a sound of acknowledgement and reassurance, a voice without words but filled with intent. Dr. Clark, standing nearby, caught the sound, noting the change in Ghost's demeanor, the quiet communication between man and dog, the unspoken bond that had endured separation, injury, and the passage of hours. Ghost pressed closer to the door once more, the warmth of his body radiating into the sterile corridor, the subtle shift of his weight a reminder of vigilance, of protection, of the unwavering patience that only a bond forged in trust could create. And as the first full light of morning spread through the hospital, casting long reflections across the polished floor, Ghost remained, still and white, eyes fixed on the man he had chosen to wait for, embodying the loyalty that had no need for speech, a quiet promise in a world that often forgot the meaning of steadfast presence. By mid-morning, the hospital had changed its sound. Night had been soft machines, whispered footsteps, and the low breathing of families sleeping in chairs, but morning brought wheels, voices, elevators, paper cups, and the clipped rhythm of people trying to outrun bad news. Ghost did not like it. Too much movement. Too many scents layered over the one that mattered. Coffee, raincoats, hand sanitizer, warm toast from the cafeteria, rubber soles, clean linen, anxiety, and underneath it all, faint but steady, Jordan Hayes. Ghost stood when the shift changed, his white coat catching the bright overhead light until he looked almost carved from winter. A young orderly slowed near him with a stack of folded blankets and smiled carefully. "Still here, buddy?" Ghost did not answer. His amber eyes stayed on the ICU doors. Dr. Emily Clark watched from the nurse's station, one hand wrapped around a paper cup she had forgotten to drink from. She had spent the last 20 minutes reviewing Jordan's chart, and the numbers still bothered her. Not because they were dramatic, because they were almost too calm. His oxygen level held. His pulse rose and dipped within a narrow range. His scans showed no clear reason for the depth of silence he remained trapped inside. It was as if his body had not surrendered, but had gone somewhere deep and locked the door behind it. "Any change?" asked Nurse Patricia Wells, a gray-haired woman with a warm Tennessee voice and the steady hands of someone who had seen generations of families walk through fear. Emily shook her head. "Not on paper." Patricia followed her gaze toward Ghost. "That dog thinks otherwise." Emily took a slow breath. "I am beginning to think he has been telling us something since the first night." Patricia looked toward room 417. "Service dogs notice things before we do sometimes." "This is more than noticing," Emily said quietly. At that moment, Ghost moved. Not quickly, not wildly. He rose with the deliberate certainty of an animal responding to a command no human had spoken. He walked to the door, placed his nose near the lower seam, and inhaled once. Then again, his ears shifted forward. His body tightened. Emily set down her untouched coffee. Inside the room, Jordan lay still beneath the thin blanket, the morning light touching the side of his face. He looked younger in sleep, the lines of service and grief softened by unconsciousness. The dog tag beside his bed was quiet now, resting flat on the tray. Emily entered the room alone. The door whispered open, and Ghost took one step as if to follow, but Patricia gently blocked him with her body. "Not yet, sweetheart," she murmured. Ghost accepted the boundary, but barely. His eyes tracked Emily across the room. Emily stood beside Jordan and listened. The monitor beeped. The ventilating equipment sighed softly. Somewhere in the hallway, a phone rang twice and stopped. She checked the 4-line, the blood pressure cuff, the leads on his chest. Everything was where it should be. Still, Ghost's attention had not moved from the bedside table. Emily looked at the tray again. The dog tag, a folded wallet, a small black notebook sealed in a plastic bag from the emergency intake team, a simple braided cord bracelet, worn smooth from years of touch. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. Then Jordan's left hand shifted. Not much, only a slight curl of the fingers, but Emily saw it. She leaned closer. Staff Sergeant Hayes, she said gently, using the formal voice patients sometimes reached for when nothing else could find them. Jordan, can you hear me? His eyelids trembled. Ghost released one sharp breath from outside the door. Emily glanced back. The dog was standing now, tall and motionless, his face inches from the glass. Jordan's fingers moved again, this time toward the bedside table. Emily followed the movement and saw that his hand was not reaching blindly. It was reaching in rhythm. Tap. Pause. Tap. 2 fingers against the sheet, so faint she almost missed it. Tap. Pause. Tap. Emily felt the room narrow around that sound. Jordan, she whispered, are you trying to tell me something? His lips parted, but no voice came. His hand trembled, then fell still. Outside, Ghost gave a low, aching whine that seemed to pass through the door and settle in the center of the room. Emily looked from the dog to the bedside table, then back to Jordan's hand. The dog tag had tapped the same rhythm in the night. Tap. Pause. Tap. Not random. Not a tremor. A pattern. She picked up the black notebook and opened it carefully. Most pages were filled with brief lines, dates, names, fragments of memory, the kind of writing veterans sometimes kept when sleep became crowded. Then she saw it, written near the back in block letters, underlined twice. If I cannot speak, Ghost knows the signal. 2 taps means check the bracelet. Emily's throat tightened. She turned to the braided cord bracelet on the tray. It looked ordinary at first, dark green and black, the colors of old field gear, tied around a small metal clasp. But when she lifted it, she felt something firm sewn into the underside. A tiny medical identification strip, hidden beneath the cord. She turned it toward the light and read the engraving. Rare medication sensitivity. Severe reaction possible. Contact Veterans Affairs physician before standard sedative protocol. For 1 second, the whole room went silent in her mind. The machine still beeped. The hallway still moved. But Emily stood frozen with the bracelet in her hand, understanding at last why Ghost had waited, why he had listened, why he had guarded the door like the truth itself had been trapped inside. Jordan had not simply been sleeping through recovery. His body had been fighting a medicine that no one knew could harm him because the warning had arrived with a dog, not a chart. Emily pressed the call button and turned toward the door. Ghost met her eyes through the glass, calm now, as if he had been waiting for her to finally hear what loyalty had been saying all along. The bracelet lay in Dr. Emily Clark's palm like a thing far heavier than thread and metal. For a moment, she only stared at it, feeling the quiet collapse of certainty that comes when a room tells you one story and the smallest object tells you another. Then training returned. Calm, clear, immediate. She called for Nurse Patricia Wells, requested the attending pharmacist, and asked for Jordan's Veterans Affairs records to be pulled again, this time under the emergency allergy and sensitivity flag. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. In an ICU, urgency often sounded like restraint. Outside the room, Ghost stood at the glass, his amber eyes following every movement. He did not pace now. He did not whine. The message had been delivered, and some ancient part of him understood the difference between being ignored and being heard. Patricia stepped in with a tablet, her face softening as Emily showed her the hidden strip beneath the bracelet. Lord have mercy, Patricia whispered. Emily nodded once. We missed it because it was not in the transfer summary. But he did not miss it, Patricia said, glancing toward the door. Ghost's ears twitched at her voice. Emily looked at Jordan, still pale beneath the morning light, his breathing even but shallow, his hand resting where the signal had ended. No, she said quietly. He did not. Within minutes, the room changed without becoming loud. The pharmacist arrived, a serious man named Daniel Price, carrying a laptop and a narrow frown. A respiratory therapist checked Jordan's oxygen flow. Patricia adjusted the medication schedule with careful hands. Emily stood at the bedside and explained each step to Jordan as if he could hear every word, because she had learned long ago that silence was not the same as absence. We found it, Staff Sergeant Hayes, she said. Your dog helped us find it. We are changing the medicine now. You just keep fighting from your side. At the sound of his name, Ghost pressed his nose to the glass. A faint fog bloomed there from his breath and vanished. Daniel confirmed the warning through an older Veterans Affairs note from 2 years earlier, buried beneath routine records and a previous hospital discharge from Atlanta. The sensitivity was rare, Not always life-threatening, but enough to slow recovery, enough to deepen confusion, enough to keep a wounded body from climbing toward the light. Emily absorbed the information without blaming anyone aloud. There would be time later to examine the chain of paperwork and what had been missed. Right now, there was only a man on a bed, a dog at the door, and a narrow path back. The first change was small, almost invisible. 20 minutes after the medication adjustment, Jordan's heart rate lifted by a few beats. Not dramatic. Not the kind of miracle people recognize while it is happening. Just a number moving toward home. Patricia saw it first and did not speak, only touched Emily lightly on the sleeve. Emily looked up at the monitor, then at Jordan. His eyelids fluttered once. Ghost saw her face change before anyone moved. He rose so fast his leash scraped softly against the floor where security had looped it to a chair leg, not cruelly, just enough to satisfy policy. Patricia stepped into the hall and unhooked it without asking permission. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured. Just inside the doorway. Emily did not object. The ICU door opened with a soft pneumatic sigh. Ghost entered like he was crossing sacred ground. One paw, then another. His nails clicked once on the tile, then stopped as he slowed himself. Careful, controlled, trained down to the bone. He did not rush the bed. He looked first to Emily, then to Patricia, then to Jordan, as if asking where his duty was allowed to end and his love was allowed to begin. "Easy," Emily whispered. Ghost approached the side of the bed. The room seemed to hold its breath. He lifted his head until his nose reached Jordan's open hand. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then Jordan's fingers moved. Barely. A brush against white fur. Ghost closed his eyes. That was all. No bark. No leap. No grand display. Just a dog receiving the smallest proof that the man he loved was still somewhere inside the silence. Emily felt her own eyes burn and turned slightly, pretending to check the monitor. Patricia did not pretend. She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist and looked toward the ceiling like gratitude had become too large to keep inside her chest. Jordan's lips moved. The sound was thin, rough, hardly more than air crossing stone. Ghost's ears lifted. Emily leaned close. "Say it again, Jordan." His mouth trembled, then shaped one word. "Ghost." The dog lowered himself immediately, front paws folding, chest touching the floor beside the bed. It was the position of a working K9 at rest, the place between readiness and peace. But his tail gave one slow thump against the tile. Then another. Emily smiled through the ache in her throat. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, a soft electronic heartbeat filling the room. Outside the window, morning had brightened over St. Mercy Hospital, turning the rainwater on the ledges into thin lines of silver. Jordan's hand remained tangled in Ghost's fur. His grip had no strength yet, but it had intention. And sometimes intention was the first step back from the edge. Emily looked again at the worn bracelet on the tray, then at the dog tag, then at the white shepherd lying beside the bed as if he had always belonged there. She understood now that Ghost had not been guarding a secret. He had been guarding a bridge, the fragile crossing between a man who could not speak and a world too busy to listen. And for the first time in 4 nights, the room no longer felt like a place waiting for loss. It felt like a place learning how to hope. By afternoon, the story of the white shepherd had moved through St. Mercy Hospital in the quiet way stories travel, where people are tired and in need of something good. A unit clerk heard it from a respiratory therapist. A cafeteria worker heard it from a nurse buying soup. 2 janitors passing the ICU glanced through the glass and saw a Ghost lying beside Jordan Hayes with his chin resting near the bed rail, still as a statue, his white coat bright against the blue-gray floor. No one spoke loudly around them. Even the machines seemed softer. Jordan did not wake all at once. Recovery came the way dawn comes through storm clouds, first as a lighter edge, then as a slow spreading of warmth. His fingers moved more often. His eyes opened for seconds, then closed again. When Dr. Emily Clark asked if he could hear her, his brow tightened, not with fear, but effort. When Patricia Wells said, "Your boy is right here," Jordan's hand searched the sheet until it found fur. Ghost rose every time, careful not to pull the lines or disturb the blanket, and placed his head beneath Jordan's palm as if guiding him back by touch alone. Emily adjusted. His care hour by hour. The medication that had clouded his body was gone from his system little by little. His breathing deepened. His color improved. Still, Emily knew better than to call anything simple. The body held memory. So did the heart. And Jordan Hayes carried more than a medical chart could name. That evening, when the windows reflected the room back at itself and the sky over Charleston turned the color of pewter, Jordan opened his eyes and kept them open. Ghost noticed before the monitor changed. His ears lifted. His tail struck the floor once, soft as a knock. Emily stepped closer. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," she said gently. "You are in St. Mercy Hospital. You are safe." Jordan blinked slowly. His gaze moved from her face to the ceiling, then to the floor, then down to the white head pressed near his hand. For a moment, confusion held him. Then recognition broke through. Not loudly, not dramatically. It arrived in the smallest breath. "Ghost," he whispered. The dog's whole body trembled. He did not jump. Training held him steady, but love moved through him like wine through tall grass. Jordan's eyes shone as he managed to curl his fingers into the fur behind Ghost's ear. "You found it," he said, each word rough and separated by breath. Emily leaned in. "He helped us find the bracelet. The warning. You had written it in your notebook." Jordan closed his eyes, and a tear slipped toward his temple. "Told him," he whispered. "Long time ago." Patricia stood near the foot of the bed with a folded blanket in her arms, pretending she had come in for supplies, though everyone knew she had come because hope was happening and she did not want to miss it. Emily's voice softened. "Told him what?" Jordan swallowed. Ghost raised his head, watching him with that grave devotion only working dogs seem to carry, as if every word mattered because every word had once meant survival. "If I go quiet," Jordan said, "guard the sign." His fingers brushed the braided bracelet now resting back on his wrist. 2 taps. "Check the bracelet." Emily looked at him, then at Ghost. He remembered. Jordan's mouth curved faintly. He remembers everything. The room settled around that. Truth. Outside the ICU, a child visiting her grandfather stopped at the window and waved at Ghost. Ghost turned his eyes toward her for 1 second, then back to Jordan. His duty was kind, but it was narrow. Jordan saw it and gave the smallest laugh, more breath than sound. "Still serious, huh?" Ghost answered by laying his chin on the edge of the mattress. Emily watched the exchange and felt something inside her loosen, something she had not realized had been clenched for years. She had become skilled at saving bodies, but somewhere along the way she had forgotten that healing often entered by a smaller door. A dog's patience, a bracelet overlooked, a hand finding fur in the dark. Later that night, Jordan was strong enough to speak in broken pieces. He told Emily that Ghost had been assigned to him after a difficult deployment, first as a working K-9, then as a service companion when the silence followed him home. Ghost had learned the sound of panic before Jordan knew it was coming. He had learned which nightmares made Jordan sit upright. He had learned to press his weight against Jordan's knees in crowded grocery stores and to wake him when his breathing changed. The bracelet had been made by Jordan's younger sister in Georgia, braided from cord because she said medical bands looked too cold. She had hidden the warning plate underneath so he would wear it without feeling like a patient. Jordan had laughed at that then. Now he could not laugh without crying. "She said God sends help in forms we do not expect," Jordan whispered. Emily glanced down at Ghost, whose eyes were closed now but whose ears still listened. "Your sister sounds wise." "She is," Jordan said. "She told me Ghost was not just trained. He was appointed." The word lingered in the room. Appointed. Not owned. Not assigned. Sent. Ghost opened his eyes as if he had heard the meaning beneath it. The rain began again outside, faint against the windows, but the room stayed warm. Jordan's hand rested on Ghost's head. Emily dimmed the lights and stepped back toward the door, leaving them in the gentle glow of the monitors. For the first time since he arrived, Jordan slept without reaching for the edge of waking. And Ghost, having carried his message across 4 long nights, finally allowed his eyes to close, not because his duty was finished, but because the man he loved was no longer lost on the other side of silence. The next morning arrived clean and pale, washing the windows of St. Mercy Hospital with a quiet silver light. The rain had moved offshore sometime before dawn, leaving Charleston damp and shining beneath a sky the color of washed cotton. Inside room 417, the air felt different. Not cured, not finished, but less heavy. Jordan Hayes woke to the sound of Ghost breathing beside him, slow and deep, a sound he knew better than any song. For a while, he did not speak. He only watched the white shepherd sleep on the blanket Patricia had placed near the bed. Ghost looked older when he slept. The alert tension softened from his face, revealing the faint gray along his muzzle, the small notch in one ear, the old stiffness in one back leg from years of service and storms. Jordan lifted his hand inch by inch until his fingers reached the dog's head. Ghost opened his eyes at once. No confusion, no delay, just recognition, steady as sunrise. "Morning, partner," Jordan whispered. Ghost thumped his tail once against the floor. That was enough to make Jordan smile. The smile was weak, but it belonged to him. Dr. Emily Clark entered just after 7 with fresh test results and a cup of black coffee she had finally remembered to drink. She stopped when she saw Jordan awake, his hand resting on Ghost's neck, the two of them framed by the bright hospital window like something from a church painting no one had planned. "You look better," she said. Jordan turned his head slowly. "I feel like I got run over by a whole marching band." Emily laughed softly. It was the first ordinary sound the room had allowed. "That is progress. Yesterday you barely wanted to speak. Yesterday I was trying to figure out if I was still in the same world." His eyes moved to Ghost. "Then I saw him and figured I had not gone too far." Emily reviewed his numbers, listened to his lungs, checked his pupils, and asked questions in a calm rhythm. Jordan answered slowly, but clearly. The fog was lifting. Each word seemed to pull him another step back into himself. When she asked what he remembered before the hospital, his gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked window. "The community center," he said. "Kids asking questions. One little boy wanted to know if dogs can be Marines." Ghost raised his head at the word dogs, and Jordan's smile returned. "I told him some dogs understand duty better than most people." Emily wrote that down, though it had nothing to do with medicine. Some sentences were worth keeping. By noon, Jordan was strong enough to sit upright with help. The movement took effort, and his breath came hard after, but he did not complain. Marines had a way of treating pain like a private conversation, even when it showed plainly on their faces. Ghost stood during the whole process, watching every hand that touched Jordan, not with suspicion now, but with responsibility. When Patricia adjusted the pillows, Ghost sniffed the edge of the sheet, approved it, and lay back down. Patricia chuckled. "Thank you for supervising, Captain." "He is not a captain," Jordan murmured. "He would never accept the paperwork." Patricia laughed harder than the joke deserved, because sometimes joy arrives tired and still feels like grace. Later that afternoon, Emily brought in a veterans liaison named Raymond Carter, an older black man with silver hair, a navy blazer, and a voice as warm as summer gravel. He had served in the Marine Corps 30 years earlier and carried himself with the easy dignity of someone who did not need to announce it. Jordan recognized the bearing immediately. Raymond offered a hand. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, good to see you awake." Jordan shook it weakly. "Good to be awake, sir." "No, sir, needed. I am retired, and my knees remind me every day." Ghost sniffed Raymond's shoes, then sat. Raymond looked down and nodded with solemn respect. "That one has been running the hospital, I hear." Jordan's eyes softened. "He tends to do that." Raymond explained that the hospital was updating Jordan's records, contacting his Veterans Affairs physician, and making sure the hidden bracelet warning would never be hidden from the system again. Emily listened. From near the doorway, feeling the quiet weight of accountability settle into something useful. No blame spoken like a weapon. No shame passed around the room. Just a correction made because one dog had refused to let a man disappear inside a missing note. Raymond then asked if Jordan had family he wanted called. Jordan looked at the bracelet on his wrist. "My sister, Naomi. Savannah, Georgia. She worries like it is her full-time job." "Then let us give her better news," Raymond said. The call happened on speaker. When Naomi Hayes heard Jordan's voice, she went silent for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds the room seemed to hear every prayer she had been holding back. Then she said his name once, broken with relief. Jordan closed his eyes. "I am here," he told her. "Ghost kept me here." On the floor, Ghost lifted his head at the sound of his name through the phone, then leaned against Jordan's bed as if confirming the report. Naomi cried softly, but she laughed too, telling Ghost through the speaker that he was getting a steak dinner when they came home. Ghost did not understand every word, but he understood tone. His tail swept the floor, slow and proud. That evening, when the hospital dimmed into its softer self again, Emily paused outside room 417. Jordan was asleep upright, one hand loose over the bed rail. Ghost sat beside him, not outside the door anymore, but inside the circle of care, where he had belonged from the beginning. The dog looked toward Emily, and she felt, strangely, as though he was no longer asking her to notice something. He was allowing her to witness it. The bond. The work of mercy. The way a living soul can stand watch long enough for another soul to find the road back. Emily turned off the hallway light nearest the door, leaving only the gentle glow from the room. Ghost lowered his head, but kept his eyes open. Jordan breathed steadily. And beyond the hospital walls, Charleston settled into evening, its wet streets shining under the first stars, while inside the ICU, loyalty rested without surrendering its post. The evening settled softly over Charleston, the light from the hospital windows spilling warm rectangles onto the wet pavement. Inside room 417, the rhythm of the machines continued, but it no longer dominated the space. Jordan Hayes was sitting propped up on pillows, his breathing steady, each rise and fall deliberate. Ghost lay at his feet, head resting on the blanket as if anchoring the room itself. Outside, the faint murmur of visitors, the distant clatter of a rolling cart, and the quiet footsteps of nurses and orderlies marked time, but inside, time seemed to pause. Jordan's eyes tracked the glow from the monitor, but they lingered on Ghost's steady form. He reached down, fingers brushing the thick white fur, feeling the subtle warmth, the slow rhythm of life beneath the coat, and in that simple connection, the weight of the past few nights began to lift. Ghost responded immediately, lifting his head just enough to nudge Jordan's hand with his nose, then settling again. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, as though he were teaching Jordan to move without fear, to trust without hesitation. Emily Clark stood near the foot of the bed, observing. She had checked the 4 lines, the ventilator settings, and the charts, but she knew that numbers alone could not capture the recovery unfolding in quiet gestures. Every glance, every micro-movement, every soft exhalation told a story of vigilance and care that no monitor could display. Patricia Wells adjusted a blanket around Jordan's shoulders, her movements careful not to disturb the bond between man and dog, and Ghost lifted his ears at the sound, following every motion with eyes that were calm, yet utterly focused. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linen, mixed with the earthy scent of Ghost's coat, and Jordan felt a sense of grounding he had not known since leaving the field. He exhaled slowly and said, "I did not know it would be like this," his voice low, carrying wonder more than fatigue. Ghost lifted his head fully this time, amber eyes meeting Jordan's with a quiet affirmation. Emily approached and placed her hand lightly on the bed rail. "You have been through a lot, Staff Sergeant," she said softly. "But you are strong, and you are safe now." Jordan nodded, fingers stroking the top of Ghost's head. "He kept me safe, not just last night. Every night I could not call out. He stayed." A faint smile touched Emily's lips. "That is what loyalty looks like." Jordan's eyes glistened with understanding. Ghost pressed closer, resting his weight against Jordan's legs, steady and patient. Patricia retrieved a small notebook Jordan had kept at his bedside, opening it to pages filled with careful notes and reminders, dates and events recorded meticulously. Emily read aloud some of the entries, each one illustrating the quiet strength of a man who had faced much and the equally quiet strength of a dog who had waited faithfully without complaint. As the day passed, the room shifted subtly. Sunlight streaked through the blinds, illuminating the soft rise and fall of Jordan's chest and catching the faint sheen of Ghost's fur. Jordan moved his hand along the dog's neck, feeling each muscle, each subtle tremor of energy, and Ghost responded by pressing his head further into the palm, a silent conversation of trust and reassurance. When a hospital technician entered to check vitals, Ghost did not flinch or growl. Instead, he moved only enough to allow the professional to complete the task safely, then returned to his previous position, patient, vigilant, unwavering. Jordan spoke softly, recounting details from his deployment, moments of laughter, moments of fear, and Ghost tilted his head, listening as if he understood every nuance. Emily sat quietly, watching the interaction, feeling the weight of what had occurred in the preceding nights. Each small gesture, each breath, Each subtle acknowledgement between man and dog marked a continuation of healing that no medication could fully account for. Outside the room, Charleston had quieted under a fading sun, streetlights beginning to flicker along wet roads. Inside, the room remained a sanctuary of trust, of patience, and of a bond tested by separation and reinforced by presence. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth of Ghost's body, the subtle heartbeat beneath his paws, and the knowledge of having survived to settle over him. Ghost shifted slightly, his chest rising and falling with the calm of unwavering dedication. And in that simple act, the essence of companionship, of fidelity, and of hope became visible to anyone who had eyes to see. The hours passed without notice, each minute filled with the quiet energy of connection, the room breathing with life that was fragile, yet resilient, and Jordan felt, without speaking, that he was not alone. Ghost's gaze followed every movement, every sound, not with anxiety, but with a settled awareness that his role, as always, was to remain steadfast until it was no longer needed. And for the first time in days, Jordan could imagine a morning when he would rise, step from the bed, and walk forward, guided by the silent strength of a companion who had never faltered, who had always been there. Morning came with a softness that made the whole hospital seem forgiven. The storm had passed, leaving the Charleston sky wide and blue beyond the glass, and sunlight poured into room 417 in warm bands across the floor. Jordan Hayes woke before the nurses changed shift, before the hallway filled with carts and footsteps, before the smell of coffee reached the ICU. For a few quiet minutes, there was only the steady sound of his own breathing and the weight of Ghost resting beside the bed. The white shepherd had one paw stretched forward, close enough to touch Jordan's shoe, as if even sleep required contact. Jordan watched him and felt a kind of gratitude too large for words. He had thanked Marines before. He had thanked doctors. He had thanked strangers who held doors and neighbors who brought food after hard seasons. But how did a man thank the soul that stayed when he could not speak, the creature that heard 2 taps in the dark and carried them like a prayer until someone understood? When Emily Clark entered with Patricia Wells behind her, Jordan was already awake, sitting higher than he had the day before. His eyes were clearer. His voice, though still rough, carried more strength. "I want to stand today," he said. Patricia raised one eyebrow with the practiced caution of a nurse who had seen determination outrun common sense. "You want to try sitting in the chair first?" Jordan glanced down at Ghost. "He says I can stand." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of his tone, then gave one slow tail thump, which Jordan accepted as official confirmation. Emily smiled, but her eyes studied him carefully. "We try it with help. No heroics." "Yes, ma'am," Jordan said. "I have been told I am difficult." Patricia placed her hands on her hips. "By whom?" Jordan looked at Ghost. "Mostly him." The room warmed with quiet laughter. It was not much, but after days of fear, even a small laugh felt like sunlight breaking through a locked window. A physical therapist named Marisol Reed arrived just before noon, carrying a gait belt and the calm authority of someone who believed in progress 1 inch at a time. She explained each step. Feet to the floor. Breathe first. Stand slowly. Do not fight dizziness. Jordan listened, nodding, but his gaze kept falling to Ghost, who had risen and positioned himself near the bedside with perfect seriousness. "He can stay," Marisol said, before anyone asked. "But he does not get to do my job." Ghost looked at her, as if considering the matter. Jordan smiled. He may disagree. The first movement was harder than Jordan expected. His legs felt distant, like they belonged to a memory of himself. The floor was cold beneath his socks. The room tilted slightly when he sat upright at the edge of the bed, and he closed his eyes until the wave passed. Ghost stepped closer, not touching, but present, his body a white line of steadiness in the corner of Jordan's vision. Emily stood on one side, Marisol on the other, Patricia near the monitor, all of them quiet enough to let Jordan hear himself breathe. "Ready?" Marisol asked. Jordan looked at Ghost. The dog's amber eyes held his. No fear, no pity, only expectation. The same look he had given on training fields, in crowded terminals, outside grocery stores, beside the bed on nights when sleep came with shadows. Jordan inhaled. "Ready." He stood, not gracefully, not fully. His hands tightened. His shoulders shook. For 1 second, The effort pulled every line of pain and exhaustion back into his face. Then Ghost moved. Just one step forward, close enough for Jordan's fingers to reach the fur between his ears. Jordan touched him, and the shaking eased. The room became very still. Marisol whispered, "Good. Hold there. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Jordan's breathing grew rough, but his eyes stayed open. Patricia's hand hovered near the monitor, though the numbers held. Emily watched his face and saw something return that no lab could measure. Not strength exactly. Not yet. Dignity. The first step back into the body grief had tried to make unfamiliar. When Jordan finally sat again, sweat shone along his forehead, and his chest rose hard beneath the hospital gown. Ghost immediately placed his head on Jordan's knee. Jordan lowered his hand onto the dog's skull and laughed once, broken and breathless. "You always did think standing counted as a mission." Ghost closed his eyes under the touch. Patricia wiped the corner of her eye and pretended to check the foretubing. Marisol nodded with satisfaction. One mission completed. That afternoon, Raymond Carter returned with a small envelope from the Veterans Liaison Office. Inside was a printed copy of Jordan's updated medical alert record, corrected, flagged, and sent to every provider connected to his care. There was also a temporary service animal authorization for the remainder of his hospital stay, signed by administration after 3 calls, 2 policy reviews, and Patricia's very polite refusal to accept no for an answer. Jordan read it twice. Then he looked at Ghost, who had already resumed his position near the bed as if paperwork were a human problem and loyalty had been settled from the beginning. "You are official now," Jordan said. Ghost yawned. Emily laughed softly from the doorway. But later, when the room quieted and the late afternoon sun turned gold along the windowsill, Jordan asked Emily for the bracelet. She placed it in his hand. He studied the braided cord, the hidden strip, the worn edges where his sister's fingers had tied it years ago. Then he looked at Ghost. "He guarded what I forgot to show people," Jordan said. Emily leaned against the bed rail. "Maybe you did show it. Maybe we just did not know where to look." Jordan sat with that. Outside, church bells rang faintly from somewhere downtown, carried through the city air in soft, uneven tones. Ghost lifted his head, listening. Jordan followed the sound and closed his hand around the bracelet. For the first time, the object did not feel like a warning. It felt like testimony. A small thing, almost missed. A hidden sign. A thread of mercy sewn where only love knew to search. And as evening returned to St. Mercy Hospital, Jordan Hayes rested with Ghost beside him, no longer trapped behind silence, no longer guarded from the world, but gently guided back into it, one breath, one step, one faithful heartbeat at a time. The late afternoon lights softened in room 417, turning every surface into shades of gold and amber, blending with the white fur of Ghost who lay at the side of Jordan Hayes as if he were a living shadow that could not be separated from the man he had guarded through the nights of silence. Jordan's fingers rested lightly on the dog's head, tracing patterns he had once memorized in training fields far from hospitals, far from quiet hallways, where trust and attention were tested in seconds and every heartbeat mattered. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, warm skin, and Ghost's clean fur, a blend that somehow signaled home, safety, and recovery all at once. Emily Clark moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting monitors and checking the 4 lines, but she paused every few steps to watch the exchange between man and dog, understanding that this was more than recovery. It was a conversation of presence, a reminder that some bonds do not need words to carry meaning. Jordan turned his head slowly to look at the window, noticing the sky turning a deeper blue, the clouds shifting like soft brushstrokes against the cityscape. Ghost's ears twitched, attentive, sensing the subtle change in light, the slight breeze that moved through the corridor when the automatic doors opened for a nurse delivering medication. Jordan exhaled, steady and deliberate, feeling for the first time the full weight of what it meant to be seen, to be protected, to be waited for. "You stayed," he whispered, voice still rough, yet carrying awe. Ghost nudged his hand with his nose and settled back down, eyes half-lidded, alert, patient, unwavering. Emily watched, silently, knowing that no medical chart could capture the depth of that simple gesture. Patricia Wells returned briefly to adjust pillows and blankets, smiling quietly, sensing the completion of a vigil she had not known she could witness. Jordan shifted slightly to sit more upright, the effort significant but less daunting than before. Ghost pressed closer, moving his body like a shield, offering warmth and calm as Jordan adjusted his posture. Outside, the hospital buzzed faintly with the life of a city moving through evening. Yet inside, a sanctuary remained, a room defined by the shared understanding of a dog who never abandoned and a Marine who had relied upon that unwavering presence. Jordan's eyes tracked Ghost's movements, careful and deliberate, noting every subtle change in position, the rise and fall of his chest, the soft shift of fur under his fingertips. He exhaled, letting the tension of days past seep out slowly, and in that exhale, a quiet smile formed. Emily checked the monitors once more, nodded to herself, and allowed her gaze to linger on the scene unfolding. Jordan reached for the bracelet on his wrist, examining the braided cord that had held a hidden warning, then touched Ghost gently, acknowledging the silent partnership that had kept him safe. Ghost closed his eyes briefly, chest rising and falling, the smallest vibrations carrying assurance and constancy. Jordan felt the security, the fidelity, the simple yet profound act of presence, and allowed himself a moment to breathe fully, to feel the warmth of his hand on Ghost, to register the connection that had carried him through nights of vulnerability and uncertainty. A gentle wind moved through the open window, brushing the edge of the curtain and sending patterns of light across the bed and floor. Jordan and Ghost remained still, breathing together, a rhythm of recovery and trust that needed no interruption. Emily stepped to the doorway, glancing back, noting the serenity, the quiet completion of a duty fulfilled, a bond honored. The corridor beyond held its usual sounds, but the room retained a sacred quiet, a space defined by patience, loyalty, and the subtle triumph of survival. Attended by vigilance. Jordan spoke softly, almost to himself, almost to Ghost. "We made it." The dog lifted his head slightly, ears alert, then rested again, body relaxed but present, sharing in the unspoken acknowledgement of endurance and care. Emily allowed herself a quiet sigh, feeling the completion of a story she had watched unfold over long hours, a narrative of trust, attention, and the quiet miracles that can occur when one life watches over another with unwavering dedication. The sun lowered further, the light dimming to amber and shadow, and Ghost shifted closer, pressing his chest against Jordan's leg. Jordan's hand stayed on his head, gentle and sure, and for the first time in days, the room felt fully settled, a place where vigilance could rest, where love and loyalty had accomplished their silent work, and where both man and dog could finally breathe with relief, together, in the soft glow of an ending day that felt like beginning.